30. Well, one of them does at least. So, I think we can start. And in presence of a quorum, I'll call the meeting to order. First topic on the agenda is public comment. Any publics out there? No? So then we'll move right along with Doug Halley with his transportation update that should include some interesting metrics. Thank you, Doug.
Good evening. This is my first time appearing before the Finance Committee as a transportation coordinator. I have retired as health director, so thank you for inviting me in this new role. As you know, I was doing transportation as health director, but now that's my sole job. And I'm here tonight to sort of give the Finance Committee an update on what's happening with the transportation system and how the selectmen are viewing its future and the metrics that we should be looking at in terms of what do we need to do going forward. So first I will review the different systems that the town has. The first one that we have is the Council on Aging van, and this is a van that is dedicated solely for seniors, and it operates on a 7-hour day basis, Monday through Friday. It also takes people with disabilities, but that is what its role is. And so it's very focused on delivering people to the Council on Aging, delivering people to hospitals and doctor appointments and some food. And then the second service that we have is the Roadrunner. The Roadrunner operates 6 hours a day, Monday through Friday. It's primarily dedicated to seniors and people with disabilities, but it also allows the general population to ride on it when there's no conflict for a senior. So about 15% of the riders on the Roadrunner might be general population. And sometimes they are general population that's riding with a senior, accompanying them to their trip. The third service that we have is the Dollar Ride. The Dollar Ride operates 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and this is open to the entire public. Right now, we generally have about 40% of the riders being seniors, and the rest being the general population, with about 30% of that being children 12 to 16. The next service we have is the Rail Shuttle, which operates 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening, basically taking commuters from two off-site parking lots, one at Mount Calvary and one at the West Acton Fire Station. This has been a service that has been growing, and right now it is to the point where we have to start looking for additional parking spaces because we're getting so many riders on the Rail Shuttle. And then the last service I wanted to talk about is one that we just began November 2nd. This is the new Cross Acton Transit, and it's a shuttle that goes through the community that connects apartment complexes, senior housing with food stores, with the Council on Aging. It runs down Great Road, goes over to Kelly's Corner, down to South Acton, West Acton Center. And in the last 3 weeks, we have seen 83 riders utilize the system. Our target for our first month was 50, based on the results of the Westborough Shuttle. So we seem to be exceeding what our target was for the first month. 80 for those 3 weeks. We're expecting to get up around 500 within a year per month, and right now we look like that's going to happen. This is the schedule of the Cross Acton Transit. It operates from 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening. Some of the stops are Sachem Way, Windsor Green, Council on Aging Facility, Donlands, Roach Brothers. It has a stop in Kelly's Corner for the high school students across from the entrance on Charter Road. And so we're hoping to start really pushing out advertising on this. We have scheduled a ribbon cutting ceremony for January 11th where the Senator Eldridge and Representative Benson will be attending and speaking then. It's going to be at 9 o'clock at the town hall. So we'll be getting a notice out for that. Now I wanted to show you some of the numerics of what's happening with each service. You can see the blue line is the number of riders per month for the Council on Aging. The red line is cancellations. And what you're seeing is an increase in ridership and a decrease in cancellations. What that means is that when we went to general dispatch with the 3 other communities, we opened up dispatch so that instead of having 2 hours per day, we were now providing 8 hours a day. That allowed riders to be able to call up on the day that they wanted a ride and be able to book a ride. And what that meant was that riders had previously been overbooking because they weren't sure whether they were going to need a ride, so they would book one, and then when the day came, they would cancel. So what we're seeing is the cancellations are dropping, and the assurance of getting a ride has increased, and so people are booking better, and the ridership is going up. That increase in ridership is also due to program awareness. And so what we've been trying to do is focus on where seniors might want to go together on the same trip at the same time. And so the health department has been running a lot of programs for the non-English speaking Chinese in the community, and they have been utilizing this van to get to those special events that we've been having for them, which has been increasing ridership. The same thing is happening with the Roadrunner. As you can see, ridership is up over time, and the cancellations are down. And again, this is largely due to us trying to develop more and more programs, getting to have a better awareness of where people want to go at the same time. The Minute Van is a little bit more disparate. What has happened with that is because we have such a high ridership of kids, we see a drop during the summer. You might even notice that we see this incredible cancellation rate in the summer. That is not a real cancellation rate. What happens is that the parents book through past the end of the summer, and they never were really going to take those trips again. So we have to just sort of clean up our books a little bit better to show what the real cancellation rate during that period is. But it tends to have a focus of non-summer hours where it's higher ridership, and as you can see, as we got into September, the ridership was starting to go up again. The rail shuttle is operating very well. We're up around 58 riders per day on the rail shuttle, and that is something that is starting to cause a concern in terms of the parking spaces that we have at the 2 lots. We're almost utilizing them fully, and what we need to do is start providing more parking spaces so that the rail shuttle can increase. What we're also doing is working with the WAVE project in West Acton. They're talking about leasing some of the lots at Mount Calvary for their workers. And they want to be able to utilize the rail shuttle to bring their workers from Mount Calvary up to West Acton Center. And that sounds like a good way to improve our service and increase the ridership. The next shows the, over time, since 2011, the average riders per day. Now, when you look at all 4 of the different vehicles, you can clearly see the dramatic increase in the rail shuttle over those 4 years. The other 3 services, it's very hard to discern their increase because their ridership is of a lower value. But when you look at it, when you combine all of the three services together on that red line, you can see in the 4 years the total ridership amongst those three has increased greatly. Not as much as the rail shuttle, but still a very good increase. You know, when I press this once, it goes twice, and when I press it twice, it doesn't go at all. So, the annual ridership, again, shows what we're seeing for each one of them. And again, it's very clear to see the rail shuttle increasing over that period of time, where the other three services, it's a little harder to discern. But again, when you put all three services together, you can see that increase over time for all three of them. This is the transportation enterprise budget, and for this year we have a budget of $509,000, and that is servicing the 5 vehicles. The income is coming from estimated fees of about $18,000, the LRTA contribution of $160,000, and the parking fund contribution of $96,000. The contribution from taxes is $234,000.
I remember you talking about this when the three of us met. Can you explain the LRTA contribution and how that, I think it's like we have to pay dues anyway, so it's sort of like our money coming back, is that right?
So I'm sure the Finance Committee is aware there's a device within the state called the cherry sheet. And the cherry sheet allocates money from the state to each community, both on a positive and a negative point of view. And so each town within the MBTA service area, and we're part of that because we have a station in Acton, gets assessed a certain amount of money. We get assessed approximately $140,000. That money, we have the right to go to a regional transit authority and reallocate that money to the regional transit authority to start services within our community. And we've utilized that entire amount of money to put in play the cross-Acton transit. So that particular service next year will be getting $76,000 to support a little bit more than half of what the program costs.
Wait, so $140,000 is what we get assessed for having a rail station, and that money goes into comes back to us in the form of the LRTA?
Yep, correct.
So we're getting $160,000. So we're getting
correct.
more back?
Good math. Because the Council on Aging van started before that program began, LRTA was funding that over and above the amount that was assessed to the town of Acton.
So we're getting a little bit more extra from the
Correct.
LRTA. So when you're saying that is, so part of that money is going to the Crosstown Connect, or the
Cross-Acton Transit.
Cross-Acton Transit,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
There's different things. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about was dispatch and how we have seen a great benefit by having the 4 communities together in dispatch. This chart shows what the inbound and the outbound calls have happened over since May. And you can see a dramatic increase in the calls. Outbound calls means someone has called the dispatch and left a message and they have to call that person back. So that gives you a reflection not only of how many people are being answered immediately, but how many callbacks have to be put together during that course of time. And this gives you even a better picture of what the total calls have been for dispatch since last May. See, it did it again. Stop. This graph shows you what the door-to-door services of the percentage of rides provided by population. So 29% of the general population uses the 3 door-to-door services. 4% are people with disabilities, and the remainder are seniors. This is a circle showing you the purposes of their trips. So 21% is medical. We have people that are doing trips for education, 11%, social recreation, 14%, shopping, and nutrition. So there is a full range of different services that these people are being able to access because of these, the availability of the vehicles. We had worked with Margaret in regards to determining what type of metrics should we be looking at in regards to how do we know we're succeeding? How do we know that we're providing the service we wanted to do? And I brought this to the selectmen a month ago, I believe, and what we went over is how do we compare with other communities? And so, for instance, this is a graph that shows Acton's 3 services in relationship to Littleton and Maynard. And one of the key factors that we look at this is what the rides per hour are. In Acton, that rides per hour range from 1.4 to 2.1. In Littleton, that range from 1 to 1.7. And in Maynard, they have a fairly high average at 2.7. Now, the reason why Maynard is able to get that higher rides per hour is because of the size of the community and the density of the community. Basically, their riders aren't having to travel as far as our riders. But by and large, Acton is doing fairly well in regards to any comparison with other communities in terms of our ability to get those rides per hour. And the rides per hour is one of the focuses that we have, and that's why we're trying to tie into the programs that are being provided by the Council on Aging, by the Nursing Service, by the Health Department, and by the Recreation Department, so that we can discern better and better when we have groups of people that all want to go in the same location. Right now, we're talking to the Commission of Disability who want to have an event on Martin Luther King Day, which they want to transport people on that day. And fortunately, our van is running that day, and it looks like we'll be able to service them and increase our ridership from that. So as we talked to the Board of Selectmen, what we looked at was what recommended metrics did we think were appropriate. So right now, in terms of our unduplicated monthly census, and what does that mean? That in any given month, we're dealing with 151 different people currently. And so increasing the number of people that we are providing service to, we believe should be a very important metric. The other metric is we're averaging 1.66 rides per hour between those 3 services. And so what we're looking for is, number one, to increase our unduplicated monthly census from 151 up to 180 in 2018, and to increase our ridership per hour from 1.66 to 2 rides per hour in 2018. So those are the goals that we've placed in front of us, and that's what we're looking to achieve. So that completes that, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Roland?
Doug, is there any need for, with the residents of Robbins Brook, in the seniors
absolutely.
up there, and that adding to, like the fixed route to Robbins Brook and Nara during the summer for the people at Robbins Brook, and then bringing them to the Council on Aging or Town Hall or what have you? The or even the other one would be the one where the golf course was.
Quail Ridge.
Quail Ridge,
Yeah.
and that one too.
Yeah.
It's because they're both over 55 communities in town that.
There is no doubt there is a need there. As we started up the Cross Acton Transit, we reached out to many people within the community, and we got back a lot of feedback. I can tell you, there isn't a part of the town where transportation isn't needed. We had people down in South Acton concerned that they can't get to Powder Mill Plaza, that this shuttle that we've created won't go there. We had people at Robbins Inn and Robbins Brook saying the same thing. We'd like to access this. But the biggest problem with creating just one van in a shuttle is the time lapse. And that if you create a trip that is longer than desirable to the customer, even though it's going to where they want it to go, they won't ride it. So one of our focuses was to try to keep the trip to 1 hour and no less, no more, so that the riders would feel like they're getting to where they need to go. As we look at our trips for the dollar ride and the shuttle in the next year, we may determine to convert the dollar ride to an additional shuttle and there expand the system and make the trips longer because we would have 2 vehicles that people could rely upon. We would make the overall longer, but the period in which a vehicle is coming would be shorter. Yes. Yep. Yep.
Mr. Doug.
Confused about a couple of things, which is normal for me, but on the slide that's Acton, Littleton, Maynard.
Yep.
These rides per hour actually are 5, is that right? 1.4 plus 1.5 plus 2.1?
Yes, you could add them up, but it's sort of an unfair way of looking at it because Acton has 3 vehicles and Maynard only has 1.
Yeah, but Littleton has 2?
Yep.
And they're doing 2.7?
Yep.
And we've got 3 and we're doing 5, right?
Yep, correct.
Okay. How long has Littleton been in business? Is there any factor that we should know about, like they only started yesterday? Or
No, they've been in business quite some time. Now that they joined the Common Dispatch, they're looking to increase the ridership on their second van, but they've been in business for a while.
What are the differences in population in these 3 communities? Do you know?
The difference in population, I believe Littleton is, close to 10. Yeah, yeah. And Maynard is, about 8 or 10. No, Maynard is more densely populated, but it has a smaller population because of the area of the community.
So it's about par. I mean, they've got 12,000 in one, 8,000 in the other. That's 20 against our population of 22.
Yeah.
We're doing 5 rides a day, and their sum is 5.2. So,
yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I guess what I would love to see at this point is some comp data, in terms of how local transportation systems like ours compare in other parts of Massachusetts and in other parts of New England, where we can stabilize, factors like population and so on, and get a sense of whether or not we're ahead of the game, behind the game, and so on, so that we've got some comps on our metrics. I think that would be very useful to have.
It's certainly something we're looking at. It's a very difficult thing because, number one, Acton is ahead of almost every community in the state in terms of providing transportation. There's a significant difference between close to Boston transportation to Route 495 transportation. So as we've been going forward, we're looking at communities like Westborough that seem to be on the same trend that we are, and we'll be able to provide numbers in terms of how their ridership is. They're similar in size to our community, but also dissimilar. They have a higher population, but they have a higher day population, much higher than Acton because of the number of businesses they have located there.
Okay. Then the data that's on the page that has the total calls slide, is that regional information? Is that from LRT?
Yeah, that's for those total calls for our 4 communities.
Just the 4 that are in our dispatch group,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And those are, I presume, us, Littleton, Maynard, and who else?
Boxborough.
Boxborough, of course. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just see, Doug, a global metric. If we take our $500,000 operating budget divided by the total rides per year of 97.45. It comes with a number of $52.27 per ride. Which is,
You're not including the rail shuttle numbers with
well,
that.
it's,
We've got a total of about 22,000 rides per year, including the rail shuttle.
yeah, okay. But I guess the point being, I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number. It's just a number.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting, in foregoing or moving forward. Seems like as the rider population would increase, that cost per ride would come down on an annual basis.
Right. So right now, the door-to-door services, they're about $25 per ride. If we achieve that 2 hours, 2 riders per hour, we'll drop it down to about $21 per ride. Okay. The rail shuttle is about $8 per ride right now.
Mr. Chairman, don't we have to be careful to keep the rail shuttle out of these numbers because the other communities don't have a rail station?
Yeah.
If we mush it together, we're going to distort our numbers, right?
Well, and I could keep it separate, but I believe all of these vehicles are part of our transportation program. So
Well, of course.
No, this doesn't include the rail shuttle.
Yeah, I'm just saying that when I look at these other towns, and you can see where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
We've been at this now for 3 years or 4 years. This is the 4th year, or is this the 3rd year? I forget. And we had the whole
yeah,
program.
it's for 2011.
Yeah, and the idea was that we would make this investment for a number of years in the neighborhood of $250 to $350 a year.
Yeah.
And then at some point, you blow the whistle, stop, get off the bus, and say, okay, so how do we do? And at that point, I think it's going to be, this is great because this introduces a lot of clarity to the numbers that I didn't have in my mind, at least before. But when we start to do an analysis of whether or not we consider this thing successful, recognizing that it's always going to be subsidized, it's always, public transportation is always, at some point, you have to be able to stand tall in a town meeting and say, this is the appropriate number for Acton. To have that much of a loss occur, and yet to provide this public service, which is used by X number of people on a consistent basis, and our citizens depend on it, then you really have to be awfully sure that the numbers as they've grown over the 3-year period and as they bring us out today are completely consistent. And that's where I think that the one thing that's sort of the bogey in this is the rail shuttle, because nobody else has one, right? I mean, who else is...
Those numbers aren't in this comparison.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. But yes, but it's the same thing with the cross-Acton transit. There's very few communities that have that type of service. And I do believe we have to continue to look at our shuttles and our door-to-door services as 2 different entities within the transportation program.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you look at the chart that has annual ridership on it, for example, the stack, it looks great if you hold it like that far. But if you get close enough to it and say, okay, I'm going to take the rail shuttle out of it, it's flat.
Right, but that's why the next shot shows both the rail shuttle and the 3 services, and you can compare the 2 together.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
No,
it's
the
flat.
next shot after that.
Yeah, and okay, this makes my point. I mean, the growth over the last 3 years in terms of the non-rail shuttle stuff,
Yeah.
right, is a little scary because it's a little on the flat side.
Well, I wouldn't call it scary. It's less, but it's not scary.
Well, I would love to have seen this thing just go a lot faster, a lot further, but I'm quite satisfied with what's happening. I think it's an experiment in progress. We agreed on this committee when this whole idea was first broached that we would come up for air at the 3 to 4 year mark and see how we're doing. And the answer at this point seems to be that we've developed a solid ridership base, but it's flat, aside from the train station. So.
Again, I don't think it's flat. I think it's growing. It's not growing at the same pace as the rail shuttle, but it's clear that it is growing.
Okay, get Steve here. Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, if I could go back to the enterprise fund chart, Doug. The $130,000 for the fixed route shuttle.
Yep.
Is that a 12-month number or a 9-month number?
That was a 12-month number. And so we
it won't be that because you didn't start
Correct.
until October.
Yeah, exactly.
And what, you said 50 was the goal for the first month. What's the goal for a year from now?
500.
500.
And I'm
Okay.
fairly confident we can reach them.
So
It'll be comparable to the
it's a
shuttle.
$10,000 a month budget, and you expect 500 riders a month. Okay.
Correct, yep.
Well, one quick question related to this is, you know, I don't see, I think that this transportation program is a good thing, but I still think it needs to be promoted somehow. Is there like an advertising budget? Is there signage around town, schedules posted, bus stops?
We haven't,
promotion?
we are prepared to do that, Mike. We hadn't done it yet because, number one, we wanted to work out all the bugs of the trip first. After 1 month, we feel like we worked out all the bugs, that we're confident about where the stops are. So our next step is to start promoting it and advertising it for a variety of mechanisms. So, for instance, we had cable TV ride the van and film the trip, and they're going to start showing that on cable TV. And we're going to use other methods like that to get the word out. We're very fortunate that the schools are very supportive of the van, and they're going to be giving out the information to the students. And we have other mechanisms that we can get out and send mailings targeted to the locations where we feel our riders are going to be.
Good. Margaret?
Thank you for coming tonight, Doug. You are officially retired,
I
right?
am, yeah. but I'm still
I know you're
here.
held on retainer so we can still use your expertise. And I really appreciate, I know I've been kind of pushing for these metrics, so I appreciate this start on the metrics. I really, really appreciate it, and just appreciate both you and Franny coming tonight and kind of giving us an update. I had a few questions. One is, you know, we've talked about how there's, you know, not as aggressive growth, obviously, with the dial-a-ride, with the door-to-door services, the 3 different services, Roadrunner, Council on Aging, and dial-a-ride, or Minuteman, I guess you call it.
Yep.
But I'm wondering what the actual, like, capacity is, because at some point, unless you are doing more of these groups that we've talked about, there really isn't a lot of capacity to be having lots and lots of riders, right? Because you really are giving a single rider from one place to another. And so if you're just basing it on, you know, if you sort of take out of the equation any opportunities to give, you know, to try to coordinate groups, like I know Fran and you and I talked about this, what is the actual capacity that one van could do per day?
In terms of trips, you're looking at about 11 or 12 trips capacity per day.
Per day. Because how many hours does it operate?
So each one operates a different number of hours. Okay. The rail shuttle operates 6 hours.
Not just leave the rail shuttle out of this, but the...
the Roadrunner operates 6 hours.
Roadrunner's 6.
7 for the COA and 8 for the dial-a-ride.
Okay. And so that's where you're getting sort of like being able to do two rides per hour.
Correct.
Is roughly that if you're 6 hours, a little more than 7 or 8 or whatever, right?
No, we have already reached the capacity of trips with each of the 3 vehicles. So now our plan is to increase it by having more passengers per trip.
So you actually already at capacity with those
Absolutely.
door-to-door.
Yep.
So, because I would think it would be like double the number of hours if you can get two rides per hour. Seems like each...
2 riders per hour.
Not 2
trips.
rides?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, how many trips did you say you can get per hour? Sorry, how many trips do you think you can get per hour?
You asked me per day, and I said about
hour.
11 to 12 trips per day.
Okay, so it's like 1.5 or 1.3 or whatever.
Correct,
So,
yeah.
Okay, so that's, I think, useful information for people to understand, because if you're only doing a single rider, you really can't increase your ridership very much.
Right.
Like you kind of maxed out.
Yeah.
Because there just isn't. And so I think that's sort of the crux of the issue that we have to sort of think about, which is that it's really expensive to take one person from A to B. And the question we have to grapple with as a town is, do we feel like we need to be subsidizing that to the tune of, $23 per person to get from A to B.
Yep.
And I think that's what we have to determine. Now, as Doug said, they're working on some ways to try to build up that ridership so that, say, a group of seniors all want to go to Trader Joe's. I think that's fantastic, right? That's really the right way to go. But I do think we have to think, about is there a different way, first of all, who absolutely needs a ride door to door? Do we feel as a town that we need to serve? Who are those people? Is it the senior population, the disabled population? Is it anyone? Does anyone in town deserve to be able to take door to door and pay $2? Does anyone in town? I'm just asking. These are the questions we have to answer for ourselves. And then secondly, what are the best ways to do that? Because now, and I had sent the article to the Board of Selectmen in advance of this meeting because I thought it was interesting that there was an article in the Beacon about how Uber is coming here, and they're actually trying to increase drivers in this area. So that could be a fantastic opportunity for our town to take advantage of for these sort of one-off door-to-door, and then be able to, and if people have a means-tested based reason that they can't afford the full Uber cost, there could be some sort of subsidization that we could decide if we want to do. I'm not saying we have to do this, I'm just saying these are the things I think we have to think about, because in my mind, the door-to-door service is very, very costly, and Uber is an alternative that's much, much cheaper. Now, in doing some of these things where we provide a service to the seniors and or disabled population where we're doing big groups, I think those are great. And maybe to the extent that those vans, the ones that are, for handicapped people only, or not, but I mean are handicapped accessible, where, an Uber car wouldn't be. Well, that would be another example of where we would need to use the van. But I think those are the things we kind of have to think through. And, as you said, Doug, and I think this will be very interesting to see if it happens, that if you take one of your dial-a-ride vans out of the system and actually put it in your fixed route shuttle, because you may see that, we just don't have, like we've talked about, we don't have as much one-to-one or door-to-door needs anymore, because we're actually addressing it through a more efficient system with this fixed route shuttle. So anyway, these are just some issues that I've talked with Doug and Franny about. I wanted to kind of illuminate, because I think that's what we have to kind of think through. In terms of the metrics, I would be interested, these metrics that you've presented, I'm assuming they're just for the door-to-door.
Correct.
Right. So I would love to see some metrics also for the rail shuttle and the fixed route shuttle. I know you mentioned one on the fixed route, which is the 500 within the first year, but I think that would be useful to have those as well. And that's great news that the rail shuttle is so good.
It's maximized, and the cost is about $8 per ride, or at this point in time. So
yeah, that's great. So congratulations on that, and congratulations on getting the fixed route shuttle going.
Thank you.
Great.
Can I ask what the capacity is on the rail shuttle routes, the 2 stops?
The capacity of the bus
The
itself?
the parking lot?
I think, if I remember correctly, we have about 24 to 30 spaces between the two.
Between the two, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the train station is looking at 35 plus possibly another 65 plus possibly another 30 spots, so there could be well in excess of 100 additional spots added at the station at some point. That's like a maximum.
But from the other point of view, they're also talking about dropping the Concord station from the express train, which would then force more people to Acton.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Right. I was just going to ask on the metrics, if you could, would it be possible to add, and maybe this was avoided for the obvious reason, but some financials around it, sort of the cost per each of these services per trip. So in a sense, as a follow-on to what Margaret was saying, is if there's any ability to consolidate these expenses or identify what the most expensive ones are and perhaps substitute that with an Uber or perhaps another service, that would be helpful, just to know those metrics as it is. And then, just real quick, and maybe you didn't look at this, but I was curious when you looked at Littleton and Maynard and their ridership. Did you have any sense on how those towns, admittedly, they're, I think as you sort of alluded to, they're smaller and maybe behind the curve with respect to us and their transportation programs, but did you have any sense on how they funded their programs and sort of how they looked at that holistically?
I know that Maynard fully funds theirs for the assessment. They only have one bus. Littleton funds one of their buses through their assessment. The other one they fund through their town meeting.
So by the assessment, you mean the fees that they,
From the cherry sheet.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so do they charge fees per ride per user?
They charge about the same as we do, $1 per ride
I see.
within the community.
So percentage-wise, if our fees are just a tiny fraction of the total overall expenses, theirs are probably in line with that?
Correct, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Jason?
Two quick questions. Taking your 151 unduplicated monthly census riders per month on the door-to-door and comparing that with a town population of 21,000 and change, that comes to about 0.7% of the population. Does that represent a majority of the citizens in town who are non-ambulatory, not on a school bus route, no longer able to drive, or do not have access to a car? Or is there any way to know that information?
Probably a difficult information to attain, but I would assume that they're not the majority of those people. I would assume that they're a portion. And I would say that the portion of the budget that's dedicated to them is similar to the population that we're serving. You know, of a $90 million budget.
Yeah, no, looking at it, another way for you to present it when you go to present it to town hall,
Sure.
to town meeting is, this is about $10 per person per year.
Yeah.
Is what the assessment comes to. So
For you know,
for every citizen.
that's not necessarily the unduplicated census for the year. That's in any given month.
No, that's 10%, $10
Yes.
per citizen of the town of any age. That's what
For
the levy is
yeah,
to
yeah.
cover the $233,000.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, it's just that's a way of presenting it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Do you want to?
I just wanted to answer. Margaret's, this is Franny Osman, a selectman and transportation advocate. Margaret, you mentioned Lyft and Uber, and I just wanted to tell you that the other day I was at a meeting and there was somebody presenting from Lyft, and I was talking to him afterwards, and they really want to move to this area, and it all depends on how many requests there are and how many volunteer drivers, or volunteer in quotes, there are. So the more people call Lyft for a ride, the more it will develop the program here. And they have a setup where they can discount trips. Now, they don't pay the discount, but let's suppose the town wanted to discount trips in the evening for people with disabilities or on weekends for people who needed it. They can do the technology such that people could just call the Lyft and the price would somehow be worked out such that certain origins or destinations could be arranged to be discounted. So that would be a relationship that would be good to work out between the town and those companies.
Can I ask a question on that? That's really cool to learn. Is there a way to coordinate like dispatch services with them?
Well, the dispatch is all just organic with the way it works. You call.
No, I mean like our dispatch.
Or you text.
Like could we, I mean, at the very least, it seems like our dispatch could tell somebody that say, we're already booked, we can't provide a ride to you, but you can call Lyft.
Right.
Or you can
something
call
like
Uber.
Well, that would be to talk to Lyft and Uber about, I'm
Right,
sure
I mean, just to give them,
we could
just to give
tell
them their name, so
anything
you
we
could start driving up that demand.
Right, and what
But-
I don't know is if you don't have a smartphone, which a lot of people, or some people don't have,
Yeah.
that, especially who are eligible for some of these ride services. I don't know how you call Uber and Lyft if it's easy to do, if you don't have that smart technology.
Yeah,
I don't
like
know
the
enough
app,
about it.
I don't know either, but it would be, I mean, it'd be easy to find out, and you could probably just communicate that information to the dispatch people, just as a way, like you said, to kind of drive up some demand.
Right.
in the area.
Yeah, because I think it would be an option.
Yeah, that's great.
And there was another question you had about, just about the need. Oh, yeah, you were saying about people who need, you only want to help the people who need it. In my mind, the more I learn about this, I'm starting to consider everybody who doesn't have wheels on themselves in need. I mean, in our suburban area, it is so hard to live if you don't have a way to get somewhere. So for whatever reason it is, anybody who can't get somewhere by an individual car is in need of transportation.
Right, but the question is, should we be subsidizing that? Should we be subsidizing that if they're making $300,000 a year? You know what I mean? Or their parents are, or that's what we have to think about. So we have to think about, is it our job to provide door-to-door service to every single person? And if we are we doing that at a subsidized rate?
Right,
For
and
people that don't necessarily need it in the sense of, from a cost perspective. That's my point.
Well,
Because that kind of logic could take us down a path where, I mean, I need lots of different things, but I can pay for them. You know what I mean?
And so I'm all for finding ways to have people subsidize their rides, but I like having it available to everyone. And I would ask us, if we are going to look at what people need and what's subsidized, I'd love to see the numbers on how much we subsidize our roads. I'd love to see that comparison. I haven't ever looked at our budget to see how much we spend for all the drivers in town, helping them be able to support their car from falling into the mud.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, for sure.
Excise tax on our cars that go to that.
Roland, you had a question?
No, I just have a comment. That you pay, if you own a car in Acton, you live in Acton, you pay an excise tax that's supposed to be going to maintain the roads.
So since this is an enterprise fund, assuming the budget covers the depreciation of all the vehicles, am I correct?
The vehicles that we utilize are either owned by LRTA or owned by transaction associates. The town doesn't own them.
Okay, so they will provide the vehicle every couple of years to us?
Yes.
Okay. How many years? What's the life expectancy of these vehicles? Like 4 years, 5 years, 7 years?
They're probably in the range of 4 or 5 years. LRTA has a program in which they watch the mileage and the condition of the vehicle. And that what happens is the federal government provides a vehicle down to the state provides it to LRTA, and then we sign a lease agreement for $1 for the vehicle.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
The definition of senior for this is aged, what, 60-something or 50-something? What is it?
Yeah, it's 62, I believe.
62,
yeah.
Okay. The thing that we had talked about in the last iteration with this is things that we can do to monetize this thing, in the sense that there are sectors of the economy that benefit from it. And for example, we had some good news, which is that we had been successful at raising contributions from office building owners, I think in Littleton, right? They were kicking in $3,000, something like that? Okay.
$5,000 to $7,000, yeah.
Okay, great. I'd like to see us focus on that in terms of at least determining how much we might be able to up that. I'm looking at the chart that has, I've lost it, sorry, that has the destinations, or, you know, where you're going with it. Where's that chart? I apologize. There it is. Okay, sorry. This is the one that's entitled Door-to-Door Services, Percentage of Rides Provided by Purpose. And so among these are education, shopping, social/recreation, nutrition. What is nutrition? Is that
nutrition classes, not food shopping?
It's not food shopping.
Right.
Okay. And then there's employment/volunteer, and then finally medical. It seems to me that there are groups out there that are for-profit businesses which benefit from the citizens lofting this transportation service. And it seems to me to be appropriate for us to have some conversations with them about their providing some sort of support for the service. If, for example, you're a daycare operator and you get X number of people at your daycare center because they're able to ride the bus, that's courtesy of the town of Acton. And I think that it's not unreasonable for us to say that there's an assessment that is, this is not big numbers, but when you start going all the way around the circle and talking about medical facilities and office buildings and so on, it seems to me that in the future it might make a lot of sense for us to have an assessment which is calculated fair and square with these industry groups to determine how much they benefit from our providing the service and how much they're going to be willing to support it. I
am a big believer of public-private partnership, and I would agree with that that we should continue to try to expand on those ideas, Doug.
Thank you. That's it.
I think we're good. Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
So you had something else? One last comment?
I've mentioned this to Doug, and he's looking into it. We can save money in the future by having our own vehicles. I mean, right now it's convenient because we have transaction that runs the whole thing, and they get the vehicles, they work out all the operations. But we would save a lot of money for, it's about $130,000 to run a 10-hour day bus around town, and it would be significantly less. Do you know how much?
Yeah. Well, we save that money if we get a grant from the state that pays for 80% of the vehicle. And we did apply for one last year. We did not receive it. We'll continue to try to apply for them, and that would be a big benefit to the cost of the system.
Yeah, but these vehicles, I mean, like the small vehicle, it's called an MV1, which is sort of like a large minivan, but it holds, I think, one or two. People, wheelchairs, and/or about 5 people. Anyway, it costs about $40,000 or $50,000. And so when you think about it, it might be something that we should think about one year, investing in, so that we have the vehicle in town, and/or use this MAP, I forget what it stands for, but this program where you apply for vehicles. But I think we shouldn't rule out purchasing a vehicle if it's going to save on our yearly cost.
Thank you. Okay, next I'd like to turn it over to Steve for sort of an update on their point of view and their long-range plan. Thank you, Steve.
All right. You probably all received sometime today the latest version of the point of view. It has a few minor editorial corrections that we discussed in our last meeting. This time the numbers, well, by full disclosure, let me say that the numbers for the point of view case are pretty solid. I still don't have a line item breakdown of the town's FY15 actual or FY16 budget. So this is an assumption-based model based on line items, and I simply don't have them. I do have the schools. And I may be a little high on my reserve balance based on recent information I received. I think I'm assuming about 11 million in total reserves, and maybe $500,000 short of that. So those numbers are pretty good. They are driven off the FY15 actuals, as best we know them. And the FY15 budget was relatively in balance. So what the POV case is basically saying is that the FY16 budget as we know it is too high in terms of spending, and therefore the FY17 numbers that we used in the ALG plan last year are too high, and the FY18 numbers that we used in the ALG plan last year are too high. There never was any detailed backup to the 17 and 18 numbers for the ALG plan. It was percentage escalation off of the FY16 budget. That said, that like I said, the POV numbers, again, assuming FY15, and the assumptions that are detailed behind them are pretty solid numbers. They do show that we can come pretty close to being balanced for a couple of years. They show that we can probably maintain at least a 4 or 5% reserve balance through the 5-year forecast. Beyond that, That's all I have to say. Yes, Mark?
Good. Margaret?
Were you gonna, I know we had emailed about this a little while ago, were you gonna put the actual numbers in there besides just the assumptions, those
I mean, I can,
scenarios?
it's just 2 more pages of numbers.
I think it would be worth it to put in there, because to me, it's just kind of, I just sort of look at it and say, okay, that's fine, those are the assumptions, but what does that look like?
I can do that.
So, I think we should do that.
Okay.
Anyone else?
What is the reserves percentage right now? It's obviously above 5. Is it closer to 10 or is it closer to like 6?
It's basically, it's 11 million on 90, so it's over 10.
Margaret?
So I think this is on the ALG agenda.
Yes,
For us discussing it,
Really?
right? So I guess I need to understand what I'm supposed to be discussing, since I've never discussed the long-range plan at an ALG meeting before.
I mean, I would, go back to the recommendations and say this is what we want to see.
So we're just discussing the point of view, not necessarily the long-range plan?
From my experience on ALG, nobody's going to want to talk about anything but the current budget year. So
we won't get into, dig into all the numbers.
if
of
you
the
actually had a
LRP.
substantive discussion in December of the out years in the ALG plan, I'd be shocked. I'd consider voting for Donald Trump. That's how, I'm pretty sure this won't happen. Sometime around March is when you'll actually get to discussing these
Okay,
numbers.
so we'll lay out the recommendations from the point of view. I don't think we've actually sent them the point of view, correct? We voted on the point of view, but I don't think we've actually sent the boards the point of view. Have we?
No.
Not my job, but
So we need to do that, I think.
We can do that.
Because that's one reason I held off on giving the summary to the newspaper, because I felt like we needed to make sure that we got the point of view to the boards before. Right? Or is that not what we've done in the past? I don't know.
we have sent it to the boards as a draft for comment. I don't know that we've done that. I think some boards have probably seen at least a summary of it.
So we would send it to the
Yeah, the school committee and board.
COS, the school committee.
I think that's who our audience is, I mean, largely, right?
Town manager and Brian and
Kind of
Steve,
the ALG group.
ALG. I can do that in the morning.
Sure.
Mike, that would be great. Christina Richlick, School Committee. In the past, we did get it early for comment. We didn't get it this year for comment, but we were given a preview at our 3-board meeting in Acton. And then I'd like to include it in our packet on Friday for our next meeting, if we could. We talked about it at our last meeting. Thanks.
And I would say, I don't know what the process was in the past in terms of handing out the point of view for comment, because I think it's just sort of our point of view. So I don't think it necessarily needs comment. It's just like, because the comment part really comes in the ALG portion. We sort of set out our view, and then people can sort of say, well, we think this, we think that, and da-da-da-da, unless I'm missing something.
Well, I
How
think
it's supposed to work.
we've always given it out for comment. I mean, if you really think we've missed the mark, please tell us. But in the past, we have not gotten much comment, very little actually, that I can recall. So again, it's more of a courtesy.
So basically, we would, when we talk to ALG on Thursday morning, we would basically cover these recommendation points. All right? And in the morning, we will distribute it to the boards. So they'll have, and we'll bring copies on Thursday as well.
Why don't we distribute the point of view to those two boards, everyone on ALG, to Doug's point, and then also the summary document. Now, the question I had that I'd sent emails to you guys about earlier about the summary document is, should I include a URL? Because last year we included a URL because I posted the stuff on the DocuShare, which I'd like to be able to do, but we need to have it posted. So can we get, Doug, can you post it on the DocuShare?
Sure.
So if Doug can post the, is the long-range plan itself ready to be posted, Steve?
I probably wouldn't.
Okay. So I'm going to leave out, I already took out that piece about the long-range plan in my latest summary. So I'm going to leave out that, but I would like to just, at least to be able to refer people to the town website and they know that they can find the full document there.
The reason I say that is that the former version of the long-range plan, which we used for years, had a lot of spreadsheets in them. In revising it this summer to go into the new ALG format, I haven't taken haven't done all the house cleaning, taken out all the pages of spreadsheets that used to be there. You know, and you can tell Mary Ann that I missed her very much this year.
We all do.
But it would just, until I do all that housekeeping, it's more confusing.
Okay.
Plus, there's also the question of, you know, how many people do we want out there playing with the scenarios?
Yeah.
Because if we put it out there as a plan, it's live.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I mean, you could always PDF it if you want, but.
So the ALG really won't see an LRP on Thursday.
I can give you the two results pages to go with it.
Yeah,
That's what I'm talking about with the assumptions, right?
Yeah.
But the results pages.
Yeah,
So let's
that's
put,
is what we should submit.
yeah, I think so. So in terms of process, so Steve is going to add the results pages to the point of view draft. Then you'll post it on the on the DocuShare. And then after that's done, Mike, you can email it out.
Right.
And you can email the summary out. I'll send you an updated summary that I took the line about the long-range plan out.
Right, okay.
So it's not in there. And then I will submit that to the newspaper.
Great.
Okay.
And did you have comments, Dave?
Yeah, just a brief one. You know, there's a lot of really useful information in this document, and one thing that sort of struck me as reading it is some of the things that I thought were a little more critical, you know, the potential for overrides in fiscal 18, as well as the negative outlook for the Moody's to the school district, among others. I think, from my perspective, we're a little lost in the document. And one thing that I've typically seen fairly often and effectively used is sort of an executive summary, which is just the most salient points, like really accentuated at the beginning of the document, because there can be a lot of information that other stuff can get lost in. Right. And in the past, you know, I think that's really sort of conveyed it in a very short manner. You mentioned the summary is possibly maybe one version of that. Some way I thought of summarizing it in sort of this sort of summary would be just, you know, the status of the town, healthy, rating, et cetera, et cetera. The highlights from the budget, you know, what we saw last year, as well as what we could see in the upcoming year. And admittedly, if you're talking about a Thursday meeting, there's a little bit of a short turnaround on this, but again, sort of accentuating the possibility for an override, and then, you know, this negative outlook on the school budget regarding the budget deficits there, and then how we've looked at budget deficits as far as the holistic town budget goes. To me, those were fairly, I think, pretty important points that I'd like to see more in the front of the documents, so you'd see it and it would just grab your attention right away, rather than, you know, sort of the history of the budget and so on and so forth, which I think it's all this has come a long way this year. I've only been involved in the Finance Committee for, you know, a few months now, and I think this is great. And then one other point would be the OPEB liability. Now that we have some information from that Siegel report, would it be worth putting in the total unfunded liability just to draw attention to that number? And then if you draw that in the context of the capital planning committee for the schools as well as the town, these start to look like big numbers. And admittedly, the bill's not due today, but in the context of a long-range plan, you start looking at, maybe $30+ million that needs to be accounted for over the next decade. That, becomes a little more meaty than you thought at first glance. So that was just my thought. As I think this is again great. I really like this graph on the decrease in town reserves as far as the long-range town plan goes. I think that conveys a lot of information. But I certainly appreciate you guys have a short time window before this meeting coming up, so maybe this isn't realistic.
One really quick comment on the decrease in town reserves.
Can you put this closer? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Just a very small nit. Rather than calling it an decrease in town reserves, which sounds like an oxymoron, why not say accelerated decrease in town reserves? Because decrease, those are exact opposites used right next to each other.
Just a word change. So I would just say, just quickly, so we've already voted on both of these documents. So I actually saw your comments that you had forwarded it to Steve, and I thought they were great. The summary that I did has most of what you have in there, but one thing it didn't have called out in a specific section, which I thought was actually a really good comment of yours, was the concerns. I had them in there, but not in an organized way. That makes sense. So I had like the state of the town overall, and I mentioned like the negative outlook on the schools, and I mentioned that we might be headed for an override, but I didn't put them in like a specific concern thing. I think at this point, I think we just have to we've voted on them, and I think we have to move forward. However, I did think they were really good ideas, and I think that you could be a candidate for writing it next year.
I retract everything I said.
But no, seriously, because I actually think those are really great thoughts. And I wish I would have done the concern section, because I think that would have been helpful. I guess one question is, should we put the summary as actually part of the document or keep it separate?
Given the length of the document, I'd say yes, make a summary, because that's all anybody's going to read.
I mean, you can send them both to people, and then people could click on one, click on another, or you can just make it all in one.
We had talked about taking this on the road, if you will, making presentations, to the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. So, that's the time to summarize it.
Wait, what? I'm very confused now.
I would just add one last point is, again, being relatively new for me, it's always extremely helpful to have some sort of context around everything, as a lot of numbers can be presented to you in a vacuum, and you don't know if they're high or low or what have you. And one thing we've talked about is, the tax rate in Acton relative to other towns in Massachusetts. And then maybe something to compare that to would be like median income or something like that, at least. So consistently, when somebody over the years reads these documents and they see, oh, Acton's, 15th tax rate wise, but 50th or 20th or whatever the number is, median income wise, you immediately start thinking, oh, well, taxes, maybe they're high, maybe they're low. I just put that out there as in a summary that could be really, I think, quickly and effectively conveyed to somebody. And then in the context of, potential downgrades and overrides, et cetera, it does sound off some alarm bells. But on the other hand, you have to balance that against being alarmist and having somebody read your document year after year saying, oh, here's the finance committee, crying that, numbers are out of control again, et cetera. But anyways, yeah, food for thought. I apologize. I'm a little late to the game. I missed the last meeting, so the voting on this certainly went on without me.
I think they're all great comments. I think something for next year we should definitely include.
And absolutely include me in that process, of course.
Yeah. No, I'm very seriously. I think it's a very good comment. So, I'm sorry, I didn't get what you were saying, Steve.
I thought we had discussed many months ago, not just sending the POV, but, if you will, delivering the POV at a Board of Selectmen or school committee meeting as well. So then we'd have the opportunity to get David to write the PowerPoint charts.
That's true. You could do a PowerPoint, which we have not voted on yet. Yes. All right. So in terms of, we got the order of operations all set, right?
Right.
So
working on the summary.
So I'll just send you the draft that has the part deleted.
Steve is going to results pages. We will distribute it to the LT committee and the other boards. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And we move on to the any other subcommittee updates that you want to report on. We talked to, well, I guess we pretty well covered transportation. Is there any update on Acton 2020?
So let's see. So Acton 2020 is not really meeting regularly right now. But Kelly's Corner Steering Committee is trying to engage them in helping with this sort of outreach effort in preparation for town meeting as we finalize the Kelly's Corner plan. So that's what's happening with them. And Kelly's Corner, no update from last time. I mean, we're just in the middle of just finalizing the report. And then I think I told everyone, maybe I didn't, February 4th is the big public forum where the whole plan will be presented, and definitely encourage you guys to be there. That's a Thursday, I believe, 7 o'clock or 7:30, I'm not sure. So there'll be a lot of push for that. We're working on a video to get out as well on that. So that's the update there for me.
Anyone else? Well, with regard to Minuteman is moving forward. As I said last meeting, the building committee and the school committee had voted to approve Module 4, and they have started the process with Module 5, which is actually the budgeting piece, the financial piece. They're working on the regional boards of the regional members, I guess, are working on revising the regional agreement. There's some comment there. So maybe we can get an update on that, but it's my understanding that we will be required to have a special town meeting to vote on this issue, on the revised regional agreement, and it would take place sometime in January, February?
Well, yep. The idea would be that every member town, Janet Adachi, Board of Selectmen, would be that, yes, if we could get consensus among the 16 member towns about some additional amendments that would be tacked in onto the agreement that circulated among all the member towns, I guess a couple of years ago. Acton approved it. Acton was one of 10 member towns that approved the amended agreement, but you need 16 town approval, which is why the amended agreement didn't get anywhere. And there was an effort to try to get the other 6 to buy in, and a lot of time was lost. And in the meantime, we had a building that we needed to move with. So the latest effort is due to the fact that there are some member towns that want to stay in the district, like Arlington, but want the amended agreement that they had signed on to 2 years ago, but then didn't go into effect. And that they're going to refuse to approve the building project if we don't have the amended agreement. So there's been this flurry of activity among representatives of the 16 boards of selectmen to try to work out the issues that the small dissenting group had, and they themselves have been meeting and trying to come to terms. And so we had a meeting and kind of came to an agreement in principle that on some issues. One was that there would be a payment to the town of Lincoln, which would be the host for the new school. The land has been owned by Minuteman for decades, so it hasn't been generating any property tax, but the Lincoln selectmen, or at least the representatives, seemed to think that this was an opportunity to sort of reduce some of the costs or that it's incurring, because under the amended agreement, if it goes through, they would be paying in accordance with their wealth. They're relatively wealthier. So anyhow, so they wanted to get some money. Originally, the deal was that they would have 4 tuition-free students, and tuition-free meaning including the capital and the operating cost contribution. Ultimately, the group at this group of selectmen meeting decided that they didn't want that. They wanted something a little more equitable, but, and we reduced the number, and Lincoln didn't like that. Anyhow, so we proposed to have a payment to Lincoln of, I think it's about $140,000 starting in
every year, though, right?
Starting, yeah, per year, starting in fiscal 18, which is when the construction is supposed to start. Now, realistically speaking, I think that a lot of people among the boards of selectmen think that Lexington Public Services is still going to serve the school location, because, well, basically, if you know where the Minuteman School campus is, that's where the new school is going to be, and it makes sense that Lexington's services would probably serve. But, well, this was all in the interest of trying to reach consensus. And another, I'm trying to think about another proposal was that any non-member towns that wanted to send their students would be obliged to pay equitable operating and capital contribution, and it would not be just what the state said. It would be what was a fair representation of what member towns paid, because right now there's a bargain involved where it pays off to be a non-member because the tuition is set by the state. And then I recall that the capital contribution, which is a new thing now that you can require of non-member towns, is also sort of lower than what, say, Minuteman members would bear. So in any event, but the big issue was whether, once we get all these additional amendments approved, whether the member towns, the boards, would be willing to call a special town meeting. Now, as soon as the word special town meeting came up, a number of us at the table rolled our eyes, because, you know, we've had multiple town meetings. And so, but we agreed to take all these proposals back to our respective boards. Our board took up the issue very late last night. We did not have what I would consider a really extended discussion, because we started talking around 10 or 10:15. So, but there was reluctance to call it a special town meeting, and definitely resistance to the idea of paying Lincoln as a host community. Somebody at the selectmen meeting in Weston from Lexington called it extortion, which we thought was rather dramatic, but I guess there were actually some nods in agreement. So, but in the meantime, some other towns have met. Their boards of selectmen have met, Concord has met, Lexington has met, and Arlington has met, and the 3 of them all are okay with calling a special meeting. There is resistance to the proposed host community payment, so that is probably going to get reworked. We're having another meeting in the middle of the month to see if we can work out that issue. I'm hoping to take up the issue of a special town meeting again with my colleagues at our next meeting, if not before. It depends on what happens with all the other towns. I certainly don't want to be, you know, the last town holding out for calling a special town meeting to amend an agreement that might sort of clear the way for approval of a building project, because that would get all of the towns that want to withdraw out of the district. I mean, it just so that they wouldn't even have to be involved in voting. But the idea is that the building project approval, you guys are going to be, the school committee is supposed to be recommending the financing part, which then goes to the towns, and that's when you have the 60-day, right? Have you already explained that to your committee? The 60-day, you have the member towns have 60 days to call a special town meeting if they object to the financing proposal. If no member town calls a town meeting to object, then that it's approved, and that would be hopefully effective sometime in February. If somebody dissents, if somebody calls a special town meeting to object to the financing, then the idea is we would have a district-wide ballot vote that would have to occur before April, or on or before April, the beginning of April. And in that case, you need a majority vote. For the town meeting vote, you need unanimity. So district-wide vote would be majority vote, but there is a remote chance that we wouldn't have, if we didn't have a majority vote, then there's a problem. So you really need to make sure that the towns that are going to stay in the district are willing to support the building project and that their issues are taken care of, which is why I'm a little bit concerned about a town like Arlington that really has said that approval of the amended agreement is a condition of their approving the building project. Because if there are others like them, then we're not going to get even a district-wide ballot approval. So anyhow, it's tight schedule. There are people who think that we should just separate the two, the building project and the amendment of the regional agreement, but a lot of us see them as intertwined. You can't do the building project without taking care of this housekeeping. So,
Thank you, Janet. Everyone got that? Yeah. Doug?
I would point out, and I've said this before, that one of the things that should go on the table for serious consideration as part of this process is that the Minuteman School was built on a piece of land which is an eminently developable office park site. Okay, it's right off 128. If you say, okay, I don't know what the total acreage is and what the coverage could be, but it's not difficult to see a project with a value somewhere on the order of $50 million. So from the standpoint of a town, I don't know what their taxes are at this point per thousand, but in an Acton situation where it's $20 per thousand, that's $1 million a year in real estate taxes, which they are not receiving for a property that they are supporting with police, fire, and other town services. So it is not in the least bit unreasonable for Lincoln to say, you know, you're sitting on one of our golden eggs here, and we want to get paid for it. And we as Acton would certainly take a position like that if we had such a valuable asset consumed by Minuteman. So, I mean, it would certainly be on the table, and it would be leverage for us, and we would derelict not to use it. So, you know, that school does not need to be where it is. And if it's a tear down and a rebuild, then it's an opportunity for the ownership entity of the school to sell the land, and it's an opportunity to thereby subsidize the cost of creating a new school in a far less expensive location, and for Lincoln to collect a lot of taxes going forward. So it's not, you know, this stuff about them being unreasonable, that's not true at all.
I don't know if this protocol is correct, but we had a Boxborough 3 board meeting, and Vince Amoroso spoke and gave an update as to his activities with Minuteman. And then there was a meeting of Board of Selectmen from numerous towns after that. And then we had another update at our school committee meeting last week about what was termed the Boxborough Protocol. And I must admit, I don't completely understand it, but I wonder if, Janet, if you could explain that part of the agreement.
I'm standing here, I'm remembering the Lincoln payment, and I'm thinking, what was that first item? It's the Boxborough Protocol. First, you start with the 2014 amended agreement that didn't get beyond 10 approvals, and then you tack on what is called the Boxborough Protocol. Vince Amoroso, who's the chairman of the Board of Selectmen in Boxborough, said that one of the issues with trying to get was that there were towns that wanted to get out. They're small enrollment towns. They typically have 5 or fewer students. They want to get out. And one of the problems is with the way the district is set up is they have a minimum 5 student tuition rate, so that there are towns that have 2, 3, 1 who are still paying as if they had 5 students, and that for some reason has not ever been changed. It's possible that it'll come up for discussion, but Vince's proposal was to have more certainty in the whole process by amending the agreement to include a provision that says that these specific towns are going to be withdrawing, and we would have to set a deadline for them to give all the official notification, get listed within the context of the amended agreement. And then the idea is that there would be certainty for the towns that are leaving, there would be certainty for the towns that are staying as to what the district is going to look like when those people leave. You can be able to sort of have projections about what the cost shifting is going to look like and that sort of thing. So that's basically what his proposal is. It looked very kind of sleek and tidy on paper, and there were Concord, among others, said, we've been talking with council, and we're a little bit concerned about the obligations and where do they break off and that sort of thing. And that actually, a lot of that still needs to be worked out, but that was the first part of there was the Lincoln payment, and then the idea that if non-member towns wanted to send, they had to pay their fair share of costs. And those things are still, I think, to be discussed by a number of the member towns. And as I said, I don't know. I'm hoping that we can reach some sort of agreement. I really don't want to have this just sort of fall apart and have, the process go to special town meeting, towns dissenting from the financing thing, and having the building project get, shot down, because we're not going to have another opportunity to get a 40% reimbursement from the state for the cost of a new building. Something else I would mention, Doug, is that there has been some discussion, I think, among the Minuteman administration about what to do with the old building. The proposal was to build, if you're building new, is okay, you demo the old one, but they also have been talking about partnering with businesses. They'd have that space. They could potentially lease, have some sort of arrangement to generate some revenue. So, yeah, that is a consideration rather than just, I don't know, demoing it and making it into playing fields. So, because I think that was what they were thinking of doing.
All they have to do is sell it. The developer will take care of what to do with the building.
Yeah, that's all.
One of the problems with this is that you have the folk that are focused on education as far as the Minuteman is concerned, and that's a whole hierarchy of people from true experts to just citizens who are saying, "Come on," as well as parents of kids that are in there. So you have a mixture of folks that are either highly expert or highly emotional or invested one way or another in this thing. But the thing to do, if there's any serious consideration going to be given to an alternate location, is to get into a friendly conversation with a real estate developer with a track record for doing projects of that size in the 128 corridor. And I think that what they would learn is that it's a very desirable location, and some real crackerjack people would be very happy to talk to them about it and what the possibilities are for that site. In terms of what are we going to do with the old building, you're not going to do anything with the old building. If you do this right, you sell it, you buy something you like, you build what you like, and you leave the past behind, and let somebody else run that ball in terms of how they're going to handle turning the site around, getting approval from Lincoln and others to build, and getting rid of the old building. But trying to work through all those details at this time with all of this complexity in 16 towns and nobody agreeing just adds another layer of conundrum to this thing.
And just to be clear, you're not suggesting that the other town take back the land by eminent domain, and therefore, because by what you said earlier makes sense about how they're giving up that taxable property because it's being owned by the Minuteman school entity. But from a pure Machiavellian perspective, there's not a damn thing they can do about it other than take the land back by eminent domain. They're not going to get tax $1 out of it anyway. True?
The question that was originally on the table is, why do we have this school where it is? And this was a question that was raised in this committee 7 or 8 years ago, when the question about, and that's what propelled me to go down and look at the school. So that's, my involvement goes back to when that question first surfaced, and I went down to look at this thing and found that it was a disaster at the time. And the building was literally falling apart. Athletic fields up to your ankles in water. I mean, it was just really bad. So the natural thing to say is, why would you fix all this? Why don't you just leave if the land, the underlying land, has value in the private sector?
I understand that.
This is a place where you can walk away from it, and it's a highly desirable site. There's a lot of other places you couldn't do that. This is one of them. So the reason for going down this road is that it affords the school the opportunity to literally walk away from the building. Okay. Now, it may be that we're past that, and that's not a possibility anymore. And nobody is going to try and take that building away. It's a state entity anyway. I mean, Lincoln has no standing to take it by eminent domain.
So by that same argument, Lincoln has no standing to say we should get some kind of remuneration before things get started.
If the situation is not gelled, and Lincoln is not being paid something in lieu of taxes, and it's a highly valuable site, like one that would produce in the private sector $1 million, and you were advising Lincoln about what they should do,
But they can't do anything.
you would be in there advising, Lincoln can be, 16 towns have to be unanimous, right? So Lincoln is in the position of saying, we're not going to cooperate with anything unless we get at least payments in lieu of taxes, and we'd like serious consideration given to you guys going away. And that, they're in a position to dictate, at least to bring things to a halt. Lincoln is not some town that's trying to walk away because they have 3 kids in the school. Lincoln's right front and center. So I think that Lincoln's in a wonderful position, and this is going to be the first opportunity that they've had since the school was built, back in the days of long sideburns, when we had those touchy-feely classrooms and so on that resulted in a building that was useless for ed anyway. That was a long time ago. This is their first chance to put their hand on the steering wheel, and they'd be foolish not to do it.
Understood.
Mr. Chairman,
Steve.
if I may address a question to Ms. Adachi on the Boxborough Protocol. Would these towns that are now going to get certainty about leaving comply with the existing agreement about fulfilling their financial obligations to the district, or is it just a way to slip out the back door when nobody's looking?
No, the provisions in the existing agreement that address ongoing obligations after you leave the district still, they're not going to be changed. What a number of the towns were concerned about is somehow being obligated because they were part of the district when the building project got approved, that somehow they would get stuck with an obligation. They wanted to sort of separate themselves with any new obligations, but no, to the extent that they're obligated under the existing agreement for...
Well, all we have is the existing agreement, and there's been a decision by the Minuteman School Board to proceed, so aren't they obligated?
No, well, no, the board, they're all the phases. Okay, the modules are really important. I didn't pay attention to them because they kept on module this month. But module 4, which the school committee just recommended, was for the design, okay? And that doesn't go to the towns, it goes to the state. So there's a state agency, whatever, MSBA or the other one, it's MSBA,
Yep.
that will be meeting in January to consider it. Module 5 is the financing piece. The school committee has not yet voted to send that to the district towns, and they have to because financing has to be approved by all the member towns. And that's the part that, as to which there's no obligation yet, because it has to be.
So what do we get by letting towns slip out the back door now?
Well, yeah.
So why would we want to do this?
Well, because if you keep the district the way it is, you're not going to get the 16 current towns all to unanimously support a new building project. I mean, basically, it's been a 6-year struggle to get consensus on, and it all started. I mean, the building is now erect, but I gathered that this all started 6 years ago because obviously people were anticipating that they were going to have to do something about the building and that they should consider getting into the state line to get financing. But the reason it's taken so long is because there is a lot of dissent among the members.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but these towns that wanted to get out a couple of years ago could have ratified the new agreement and they could have been out by now.
Well, that's where you get into some other issues. For example, the amended agreement provided, right now it works like the Senate in Washington, one state, one vote, or 2 votes, but the same number of votes regardless of population. Under the amended agreement, there would be proportional voting, which is, like what we have in Acton, Boxborough, the region. But there were certain towns that wanted to get out, but also didn't like that. They didn't want to approve that part. Why? I don't know if they're going to get out. It's sort of boggling,
It's
mind-boggling.
politics. Don't
that,
they know they have to compromise?
that towns that wanted to get out did not want to amend the agreement to make it easier for them to get out. But I wasn't involved in a lot of I've only been involved in this for 2 or 3 years, so I missed the earlier part where they were trying to amend the agreement. But it is baffling. I still don't really understand what the issues were completely. But you find a provision in the agreement, and there's probably 5 towns that have differing opinions on it. That's my impression based on some of the discussions. But they're trying to leave aside some of the really small nits and focus on the real deal breaker issues among the towns that aren't ready to move forward as is. I mean, Acton, we would go forward, but we're trying to work with these other towns to reach consensus. But anyhow.
Well, I'm all in favor of reaching consensus, but I wouldn't put Acton at a disadvantage by letting Boxborough or any other town slip out without paying their fair share.
Well, I think that the concern is that if we maintain the district, we don't let towns out, then we're definitely not going to get agreement on the new building, and we're going to be the district members are going to be faced with expenses to try to fix the existing building.
But
and
I
the
totally agree with you, but 16 towns let this school get into this shape. But now a few of them want to get out before it gets fixed. That's not fair to the others. They bear the same responsibility as all of the towns in that district for the condition the school's in. But they just don't want to sneak out the back door now? I'm sorry, I can't buy that.
Well, it is typically the small enrollment schools, and there are some issues regarding they want to get out, but then they want to have a tow in and get back in. But as non-members, because it's somewhat, right now, it's less expensive. Even with the now obligation to make a capital contribution, it's still, I haven't done the calculations, but I think that the capital contribution that's required of non-members isn't the same as what members pay, and that's how they save money. But I think that the member towns that want to stay in say, well, no, you can't get back in once you get out unless you're willing to pay what the members are paying. So.
I mean, if they want to apply it to everybody, that's fine. We'll dissolve the district and we'll start over again.
And there'll be no members and everybody, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just mention briefly the train station committee, the financial matters regarding that. They're still evaluating the Richards property, which would potentially add 65 additional parking spaces on the south side of the track, in addition to the 35 spots that would be part of the rail trail termination there. And then there's a new lot across Main Street, or 27 there, that would be immediately adjacent to town resident parking. That there's a small plot, I would guess it would be about 30 spots that could potentially be metered parking. And so what that means at this point, we're not sure, but the committee recently voted to send a letter to the Board of Selectmen to consider the purchase of that property. Now, I think the assessed value of it was $140,000. It seemed like it could generate perhaps in excess of $20,000 a year in metered revenue, all depending on what the new meter rates would be, et cetera. But there would be the potential for that additional non-resident parking. And I really just wanted to update briefly about something that coincidentally came to light after the last town meeting, where we discussed the landscaping and the budget for that. As it turns out, one of the rail trail committee members had attended our meeting and showed us the schematics they had for the layout of the landscaping for the termination of the rail trail, which overlaps very heavily and nicely with a portion of the train station. So it looks like some portion of that landscaping would be handled by the Assabet Rail Trail and the end of that. So that's a kind of a very nice plus. So if we revisit that topic in the spring, I suspect the numbers for the estimates for that would come down dramatically. So it's kind of a nice find.
Anyone else? Last chance?
Mr. Chairman, a couple follow-ups from our last meeting. Brian was kind enough to get me the nursing service revenue. So for roughly the first half of the year, so this number is through last week, I believe, the total nursing revenue is $84,000, which is going to annualize under 200, which is a further deterioration from even the numbers we looked at last year for the special town meeting. So I would like to suggest that we ask the town manager for a report and projections of the revenue and expenses of providing the service in the not too distant future. The nursing. The other number that Brian gave me was the meals tax revenue. And it looks like the state pays quarterly, and we've only had one quarter remitted to us from the state, but that was $27,000. And if that's the rate, then again, this is going to annualize into about $108,000, $110,000 for the year, not the $250 or so that we put in the budget. So in both cases, we've got some serious revenue shortfalls. And I think both of them need to be. Now, the meals tax, we probably ought to wait to see the next quarter comes in to see if it's any different. But the nursing, I think we need to investigate pretty thoroughly soon.
Does anybody remember what the expense number was in the last iteration of the enterprise fund for the ANS? Yeah, I don't remember.
It's $400,000 or $500,000, I think.
Wow. We had estimated, I think, in the last go-around that the losses would be $250 in the first year, growing to like $400 to $450, right?
I think we were talking about 450 something.
Yeah, but that was after 2 years. So I'm trying to relate this back to, there's a disconnect. Once it went into the general fund, we lost it. But
I think we said $2 million over 5 years or something like that. But yeah, it sounds like we're definitely on track to do that.
I received in the mail, I don't know if you guys got one, a card flyer from the nursing service. It was very professionally done. I thought it looked great, and I was going to follow that up by asking the town manager if what's the rest of the plan. I mean, that's a good piece, and we should certainly be doing a lot of that kind of thing. And I just wondered what was in the pipeline for further marketing.
Well, I think they have been doing some things. I think the debate that happened last year at the special town meeting was, were any of these things really going to be effective, or was it just Medicare changes and competitive changes that were causing them? I assume we've had a nursing service task force. It was started over a year ago. I don't think it started immediately, but they've been doing something.
Didn't Mr. Cadillac have a subcommittee to...
Right. I mean, there were a lot of ideas thrown out at the meeting, and this at least would say very little has changed.
More of the same. Roland.
CPC met Thursday and had presentations from the Acton Housing Authority and Acton Community Housing Corporation for projects for this year. One's funding the regional service that they're in that does a lot of the work for them, which has been a good value to the town, considering Nancy Tavernier and get up there in age. One of the projects for the Housing Authority was they were putting new heat pumps heating and air conditioning pumps on Windsor Ave. And they're gonna be removing, the request was to get monies to remove the old air conditioning units out of the walls and replace them with windows that are a fixed window. So it will be a lot more efficient. The ones that they had were built, I believe, in the 80s, and they were from Germany, and they were getting hard to get parts and stuff like this, and the new ones are a lot more efficient, and with rebates and everything, it's gonna be a lot more efficient for the Acton Housing Authority, so.
Okay.
Basically, where we stand now, the next ones will be regular projects going forward, so more to follow.
Anything else? Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to report that the Board of Assessors received final certification of their property values for FY16 on November 19th. And we went ahead with our tax classification hearing with the Board of Selectmen last evening. The Board of Selectmen took their 4 votes that are necessary for us to proceed with the tax recap. Those 4 votes resulted in an estimated tax rate, because it's pending DOR certification, of $19.23 per thousand evaluation. FY16, so last year was $19.05, so it's up 18 cents, so just under 1%. And I also wanted to report that that does consider leaving just under about $1 million of excess levy capacity on the table.
Mr. Chairman? May I? Brian, what was the change in the overall assessed valuation of the town? We were like 3-point-something billion before. What are we now?
I think the total base, Doug, and I never really do it by total base, and maybe I should. I usually do it by component, because primarily the presentation, is wrapped around kind of a single-family home. That's obviously what this whole presentation caters to. But I think for this average single-family home, it's up about 1.6. So given that the average single-family home's up about 1.6, the rate's up just under 1%, 0.9%, so the average single-family home is going to see about a 2.5% increase in the total bill. The commercial sector, we didn't see as much growth there. It's a little more dynamic. There's more things going on there. I think overall you're going to see a less increase there.
Thank you.
Anything else? I guess we have, I'm assuming we have no minutes to discuss?
We have the minutes that were submitted in our last meeting. I have not heard back from anybody in terms of comments on the November 3rd minutes. If there are no comments, I'd ask that we vote on them so I can issue them.
I move we approve the November 3rd minutes as submitted.
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Lovely.
Opposed? Abstentions? The minutes of
You weren't at the
passed.
last meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Next meeting, December 22nd. Make sure your Christmas shopping is done.